So, several years ago, I made a tutorial on how to use the Task Force Arrowhead radio mod for Armor 3. I used XSplit to record the video, I used Windows Movie Maker to edit it, and it's somehow one of my most viewed videos on my channel. Oh well. But that was also 4.5 years ago. A lot has changed. I used OBS to record now, I use a program called HitFilm Express to edit my videos together, but perhaps most importantly for this video, the Armor community I'm with doesn't use TFAR anymore. They use ACRE, which does essentially the same thing as TFR, but has lots of nuances and differences. TFR is in no way a bad radio mod, and hundreds if not thousands of Armor communities out there use it to great success. But I also already have a tutorial for TFAR, which I think is still mostly valid. So here's the ACRE tutorial. I will be going through more or less everything from installation, TeamSpeak setup, how to talk to people, how to use a short-range radio, how to use a long-range radio, how to handle multiple radios, how to use vehicle radios, intercoms, speakers, just about everything there is to ACRE. This tutorial assumes you know how to play the game, and also assumes you have ACE and know how to use it. This will not be an ACE tutorial. Go look that up on your own. There will be video chapters for you to skip around. The final note is that this is a tutorial for ACRE 2 as it exists right now in late January of 2021. If new features get added or things change, I will describe those changes in the video description, unless a major portion of the video becomes irrelevant, in which case I'll remake the video. Maybe. First off, ACRE, or the Advanced Combat Radio Environment, is a mod for Armor 3 that adds realistic radio experience. Instead of being limited to the vanilla Armor communications system, which looks more like an MMO setup than one for military sandbox, users can speak to each other with 3D sound, use radios to speak to each other over long distances. Different radios have different ranges they can be used for. Terrains can block or severely impede radio signals. You could stand in the middle of a jungle and hear absolutely nothing. It's a massive increase in realism, and basically every milsim group will have either ACRE or TFAR. You install ACRE just like you install any other mod, through the workshop and vanilla launcher, through third-party mod programs, or even manually. I'm not here to tell you how to do that. ACRE is dependent on CBA, community-based add-ons, so you're going to need that if you don't have it already. ACRE also integrates really well with ACE, so you may want that as well, and this guide will assume you have ACE. What is different about ACRE as a mod is that you also have to install TeamSpeak plugins. TeamSpeak, for those of you who have been living under a rock for the past decade, is a VoIP program. ACRE interfaces with TeamSpeak, or TS for short, to provide high-quality voice communications. The people making ACRE were smart, and the first time you launch the game with ACRE loaded, ACRE will attempt to copy the plugin files to TS by itself. A window will pop up saying whether this succeeded or failed. It can only do this if TeamSpeak is closed at the time, so make sure to close TS while launching ARMA with ACRE for the first time. This is a process that only happens on the first install and anytime ACRE is updated, so you don't have to do it every time. If this process fails for whatever reason, you can simply copy-paste the plugin files yourself, navigate to your mod files, find ACRE, go to plugin, and copy these two files. Locate your TS plugin folder, which for me was found here, and paste those two files in. Now you can launch TeamSpeak. This isn't a tutorial on how to use TeamSpeak, just some specifics regarding ACRE. Go to Tools, Options, Add-ons, find ACRE 2, and click Disabled. This should change to Enabled, and you should see some text in a text window at the bottom saying ACRE initialized. Take note of the Reload button. If you're told by anyone at any point to reload ACRE, this is the button they're talking about. Warning! At the time of recording, if you try to reload ACRE while not connected to a TeamSpeak server, my TeamSpeak client crashes. Reloading any other plugin works, but not ACRE. It does work if I'm connected to a server. This is a new bug that I haven't encountered until making this video, so watch out for that. If I find a fix, it'll be in the video description. Next, you need to decide whether or not you're going to use push-to-talk or voice activation in TeamSpeak. This is important because this setting will be used for local speech in-game. Local speech is ACRE simulating that you're talking to someone as if you were standing next to them. It is position dependent and ties into your in-game position and the in-game position of those people around you. Basically, not everyone on the server can hear you talk, because not everyone on the server is close enough to hear you. In-game, it sounds like other people's voices are coming from their in-game location. This is one of the core features of ACRE and TFAR, simulating local speech in the 3D world that is ARMA.
Charlie, the squad is gonna die, so I don't really care.
Maybe. Being in a vehicle or building will partially dampen voice from outside, the strength of which is dependent on the nature of the building or vehicle. Being inside an Abrams will dampen sound almost completely, whereas manning the pintle mount external 50 cal on a Humvee will barely dampen any sound. Turning out from a heavily armored Vic will allow you to hear outside more easily.
We're going to sit back a little
so
that we don't get smoked with the first strike of a tank,
Okay.
so we can come in and help you out, okay?
That's why.
So I've got
nothing worse as a medic than like
I've got a bunch of AA vehicles from
Would he
up here.
do something like that? Do you hear?
Generally speaking, if your message can be said to the right people with only local speech, you should use local speech. This frees up the radio for more important messages. The keybind for talking in local speech is, well, it depends on what your TeamSpeak setting is. If you use push-to-talk key in TeamSpeak, it will be your TeamSpeak push-to-talk key. If you use voice activation, then your in-game voice will also use voice activation. Note that servers can force TeamSpeak channels to be push-to-talk, so you may need a push-to-talk key bound in TS anyway. For example, my community has our pre-mission channel forced push-to-talk. It is highly recommended, in fact perhaps even required, to run TeamSpeak at the same priority as ARMA. You should either run both TeamSpeak and ARMA as admin, or both not as admin. Otherwise you will find your TeamSpeak push-to-talk button will not work while in-game. Communities using ACRE may have a dedicated ACRE TeamSpeak channel. If you're in a different channel when your community loads into a mission, ACRE has a setting that will automatically move you to the in-game channel. It will also move you out of this channel when you exit the mission in-game. If this doesn't work, and it should, try reloading the plugin. Consult your community for applicability. Let's jump in-game, and let's go to Controls, and then Configure Add-ons. This extra menu you may not have seen before is Couriers of CBA, and is where all of our ACRE keybinds reside. You notice that if you try to access this from directly from the main menu, it tells you the start of mission. Easiest way to do that is to go to Virtual Arsenal or Ace Arsenal and load up in whatever loadout it gives you. Up here you will see a list of every mod that has keybinds and potentially multiple selections for each mod. We're looking down here at the ACRE ones. You may not see ACRE 2 animations. This is a separate mod that integrates with ACRE to give you some cool animations when you use your radio. But for now, we'll focus on the main ACRE keybinds. All of them can be changed as needed. Just like you would in the normal menu, you can bind whatever button you want here. Note that if you are trying to bind controls from a HOTAS, they won't be accepted here. However, they will be accepted here. And so what you can do is you can set user actions here. You can see I have several of my HOTAS buttons bound to user actions here. And then in here, you can assign user actions. If you scroll all the way down here, user actions, and you can drag them over and assign them. So that's how I set up my HOTAS, and that will probably be how you have to set it up if you have a HOTAS or an Xbox controller. The first keybinds are push-to-talk keybinds. There are essentially two different ways to use ACRE push-to-talk keybinds. There's one where you basically have an active radio transmit button, which is just your radio push-to-talk. How you would cycle between radios is with this keybind down here. If you had multiple radios, you would use this key to cycle through all of your active radios, and then use this key to speak on that radio. I don't use this, however, as you can see. I have just push-to-talk 1, push-to-talk 2, and push-to-talk 3 bound instead. Basically, each radio gets assigned to a push-to-talk key, and so that key is always your radio. For example, push-to-talk 1 is always the same radio every time I push it. I prefer this, and most everyone I know prefers this method. Whatever method you use, your push-to-talk keys should be somewhere easy to reach and simple to use. It is worth noting that there are no long-range and short-range keybinds like there's FTFR. There's just push-to-talk 1 through 3, and then the active radio push-to-talk. The other thing to note is that none of these keybinds should be the same as your TeamSpeak push-to-talk. They all should be different keybinds. For those of you paying attention, mine are F9, F10, and F11, which, yeah, they're not easy to use, but I have a mouse, a Logitech G600, that has a whole bunch of macro buttons on the side, and so I actually use those to push these keys, as well as the buttons on my HOTAS. One thing to note is that if you do use the multi-push-to-talk key setup, your last used radio is considered the active radio, quote-unquote. And that's important because the rest of these keybinds will change the parameters of the active radio, as you can see here. Starting at the top, there's two buttons to cycle between channels. Next keybind is Babel language cycle. ACRE has a system where each unit is considered to be speaking a language. Anyone not speaking that language will have their voices scrambled. If your character is able to speak multiple languages, this key will cycle which one you're speaking in. You do not need to cycle this to be able to hear multiple languages. If your character can speak 3 languages, then they can hear 3 languages all the time. This just cycles which one they're actually speaking in. The next 3 keybinds are cycling ears in your radio. You can essentially assign each radio to only transmit in one ear of your headset. This is extremely useful to help differentiate radios. Say you put a long range on your left ear and a short range on your right ear. Now any transmission coming through your short range will come out of your right ear only, and long range will come out of your left ear. I highly recommend you do this anytime you have multiple radios, as it makes differentiating them very easily. If you don't have a stereo sound system, then you probably shouldn't use these because it will probably not work. Next is a keybind to toggle headset and spectator radios. So when you're alive, this will toggle lowering and raising your headset. Lowering your headset is essentially simulating you putting your headset like on your shoulders. In Spectator, this will toggle whether or not you're listening to the radios of the spectated unit. This will toggle the antenna direction of your radio. The ideal antenna direction is straight up. However, if you're lying prone, the antenna is also lying down straight with you, unless you bend it up with this keybind. Whether or not this matters is dependent on server difficulty settings, as antenna direction simulation can be disabled entirely. Open Active Radio does what you think it does. This opens the active radio for interaction. This pulls up the radio, allows you to interact with it directly. Every radio will allow you to change channels and volume from this screen. Some radios also have multiple layers of menus that can be interacted with. Clear Spectator Radios, as you would suggest. If you're spectating, you can be listening to a bunch of radios. If you want to not listen to all those radios, you can use this keybind to stop listening to all radios. Direct speech volume control. So this changes the volume of your local speech in-game. There are 5 levels, all the way from whispering to yelling. This greatly impacts the distance at which you can be heard. This is of great use in PvP, but ACRE also allows the AI to react to your speech. So going to whisper while perhaps doing a stealth assault on a compound, even against AI, can be very beneficial. Because if you have yourself on yelling, the AI will react to that. They will alert off of that if you do have yourself on yelling. The rest of these keybinds relate to intercoms. This is vehicle intercoms. You'll notice I don't actually have anything bound for these first 2, and I'll explain that later. But the rest of these are fairly straightforward. Vehicles can have multiple intercom networks, and these keybinds allow you to cycle between them. And of course, the button to open up the intercom interface as well. There are also keybinds for ACRE to God mode. ACRE to God mode allows ACRE to transmit through the vanilla VoIP chat channels. My community doesn't use this. However, if yours does, you may want to bind these. I have these bound mainly just because I never got around to actually changing them. Finally, we have a keybind for local speech through the Zeus camera. If you Zeus a lot, you'll want this bound. Normally, if you try to talk through local speech, your voice would come out of your Zeus's character's physical body, not the Zeus camera. This keybind talks to the Zeus camera. In my community's mission framework, our Zeuses move their characters' bodies around physically, so they don't need this keybind, just the normal local speech keybind, which again is dependent on your TeamSpeak settings. Next is the Addon Settings menu. This is another menu that is new from CBA. All of these settings can be overridden by your ARMA server, overridden by the mission, or left up to you, the user, to decide. Generally, things like difficulty settings will be forced by your server or by the mission. However, things like UI settings usually are left up to you. In the main ACRE section, there are a few volume sliders you can adjust as needed to adjust ACRE volume. These settings relate to TeamSpeak automatic channel switching that I mentioned before. Consult your community to determine if these settings will be overwritten by your ARMA server, or if you need to put channel names and passwords in here manually. The rest of these are essentially ACRE difficulty settings. Does antenna direction modeled, how severe is terrain lost, how far can the AI detect your voice, and the signal propagation model, which you don't really need to worry about as a user. In ACRE UI, you can change the fonts and the colors of the ACRE pop-ups. Perhaps most importantly, I would recommend changing your push-to-talk colors to different. By default, they're all the same shade of yellow. However, if you change these different colors, each time you use a different push-to-talk, the pop-up for that will be a different color, which is another great indication to confirm to you what radio you're using. I also changed the switch channel color just because I felt like it. Alright, enough of keybinds and settings. Let's actually talk about radios in-game. ACRE actually removes the dedicated radio slot in your inventory. Radios are now normal items in your inventory that can be moved about as you see fit. To talk on local speech, either just talk if you have TeamSpeak voice activation, or use your TeamSpeak push-to-talk key to talk to the person next to you. To talk on a radio, hold your push-to-talk key. To stop talking on the radio, release your push-to-talk key. While you're transmitting, you cannot hear anything from that radio. Also, if two people talk on the radio at the same time, they will interfere with each other. The point being, make sure that the frequency is clear before you start transmitting so you don't step on anyone. Also, watch out for hot mics. Each radio can only transmit and receive on one frequency. There is no dual banding like there is in TFAR. If you need multiple frequencies at the same time, you need multiple radios. To cycle between radios, either use the dedicated push-to-talk keys, which will give you the different colors, as I talked about earlier, or use the cycle key to cycle active radios. Remember, of course, you can also use the keybinds to change radio channels. You can see down there I'm increasing and decreasing my 343 channel, and of course I can also set 343 to the left ear, so now if I click it, you'll see that you can only hear the radio beeps coming out of my left ear. Same thing for my right ear, and then back to both. Now you can also use ACE Self-Interact to interact with your radios. You go ACE Self-Interact, go to Radios, and voila! Each of these radios now has a whole bunch of options. Options here to change from both ears to your left ear to your right ear, to open the radio, which we'll get to later, to share the radio, which I'm also going to get to later, and to set push-to-talk. This is the only way to determine which radio uses which push-to-talk. So maybe I want my 343 on push-to-talk 1, I want my 148 on push-to-talk 2, which it already is, I want my 152 on push-to-talk 3. This is also how you would assign push-to-talk to a fourth radio. Like, for example, I have here, you can bind the push-to-talk, set that. If I bind this push-to-talk 1, you'll see that now my 343 does not have a push-to-talk bound. There are currently a total of 7 different radios modeled in ACRE, 10 of which if you include vehicle radios. These are broadly split into 2 categories, short range and long range. These are less hard designations and more practical ones just based on the power of the radios. There is only one short range radio practically, so let's start with that. The AN PRC 343. PRC just simply means personal radio free communication. And 343 is just the model number. All of these radios have AN PRC in front of them, so I'm just going to refer to these as the 343, the 148, the 152, and the 117. So I go to the 343 and I select Open. This brings up the radio. Note that you can also double-click on a radio and double-click on this prompt to open up the radio interface directly from your inventory screen. The 343 is a very simple radio, having only 100 milliwatts of power. This gives it a range in perfect conditions of about 850 meters. This can drop to 400 meters in a city, and even worse in worse terrain like mountainous jungle. The interface is quite simple, with 2 knobs for changing channel. If I right-click and left-click, you'll see that that can change the channel. For example, this is of course channel 6. I go all the way back to 1. This is the volume knob. Right-clicking and left-clicking can change the volume of this all the way to 0, which is essentially turning the radio off. If you find yourself needing more than 16 channels, which is the maximum this knob will go to, then what you need to do is over here, you see if I'm hovering my mouse, it says detach handle. If I detach the handle, that basically takes apart the radio and accesses this. These are channel blocks. Right now, we're on block 1, but I can click to go to block 2. So now if I go to block 2, I'm now on block 2, channel 1. If I turn it back to block 2, channel 1, and you'll note that when I use the radio, now on the bottom, you can see this is block 2, channel 1. Now if I change channels, this will alternate between different channels on block 2. Block 2, channel 1 is a different radio channel than block 1, channel 1. You can see that block 2, channel 1 is also referred to as channel 17 in places. So if you're ever asked to set a radio channel that's more than 16, this is how you do it. There are a total of 16 blocks, which gives the 343 the ability to use 256 different channels, which is quite a lot. Next, we'll get into the long-range radio, starting with the 148. The 148 has a transmission power of 5 watts, which gives you 3 to 5 kilometers of range in a city and 5 to 7 kilometers in ideal conditions. It has volume and channel knobs, just like the 343. Also like the 343, it does have blocks in a way, but on this one they're called groups. You can see here I got G01, which is group 1, channel 1. If I press the Jira button, I can cycle between groups. The 148 only has 2 groups, so it can really only use 32 different channels, but this is how you cycle them. And I click enter to accept it. Now it says group 2, which is also channel 17, and now changing this knob moves between, channels 17 through 32. Back to group 1. Now this knob moves through channels 1 through 16. This radio has numerous programming features hidden deep inside menus, but I'm only going to talk about one, and that's a speaker. This radio has the ability to transmit over a speaker. So this will transmit actually just like in local speech instead of just directly into your headset. To cycle that, from the main menu, you're going to hit Mode, and top audio selector, you're going to hit Enter, and you're just going to click down to Internal Audio. There's 5 different settings here, but only 2 of them do anything. Top audio is directly to your headset. Internal audio is to the radio speaker. This is what others next to you hear the radio. Some people love this, some people hate this. So be sure to ask your squad what they would prefer. The next radio is the 152. This is similar to the 148 in many ways. It has the same power and thus the same range as the 148. It has a channel knob up here, which also functions as the off switch. So if I turn it back to 1, it'll go through a little startup animation to reboot the radio. This channel knob only goes up to 5. If you need to go, I turned it off again. If you need to go through more than 5 channels, use the preset select down here, which can go very high. It goes all the way to 99, I believe. Yeah, it goes all the way to 99. So there's 99 potential channels that the 152 can use. The volume is hidden over here on the side, so you can adjust that as needed. This radio also has a speaker. To get to that, you have to go click here, which is Options, go down to Radio Options, hit Enter, go down to Radio Speaker, and then cycle that on, and then hit Enter, and then clear to get it. As you can see, there's also a very deep menu structure where you can change a lot of things. I won't get into that because you more than likely will never need to use any of that. The final of the quote-unquote normal long-range radios that we're going to talk about is the 117, specifically the 117F, but I'm just going to call it the 117. And it has a basically very similar interface to the 152. The difference being this has 20 watts of transmitting power, which gives this a range of 10 to 20 kilometers in a city. And in ideal conditions, this will go all the way to the horizon, which is to say that it'll cover most ARMA maps fairly easily in good conditions. It has a preset channel, which you can cycle through presets just like the 152, and the volume knob right here. Note that this is also the mode switch. There's only 2 modes, PT and off. Everything else is considered invalid, so it's either PT or the radio's off. Unfortunately, this radio does not have a speaker option. The next 2 radios are perhaps the quote-unquote non-standard radios. These are all different in some way or another from all of the radios I have described. First, we're going to start with the ANPRC 77. This radio was first introduced in 1962, and it shows. It has 4 watts of transmitting power, giving it slightly less range than a 148 or a 152. This radio tunes frequencies directly, unlike all the others, which have preset channels. And so you use this knob to change the megahertz, and this knob to change the kilohertz. You can see it changes in 50 kilohertz increments. You can also use this knob to select frequency band. The first one is 30 to 52 megahertz, and this one up here is 53 to 75 megahertz. Now, I said this radio tunes frequencies directly, but there are 2 presets. So if I perhaps tune, say, 3505, and I right-click on this preset, that preset is now set to 3505. And so if I tune to perhaps a different radio, or perhaps a different frequency, and I click on that, now it goes back to 3505. So 2 presets plus 2 frequency bands gives you 4 presets, right? Well, yes, but actually no. See, these presets don't actually save the frequency, they actually save the physical position of these knobs. And so when you go to the high band, it doesn't actually change the position of the knobs, it just changes the megahertz frequency, specifically by 23 megahertz. So unless your 2 high presets are exactly 23 megahertz above your 2 low presets, then really you only have 2 presets. The final 2 radios come from our friends over in Germany. We're going to talk about first the SEM52SL. This radio is similar to the 343 in a lot of ways, although it has more transmitting power of 1 watt, which should give it slightly more range than the 343. Should be somewhere between the 343 and the PRC77 for range. It has a channel knob, just like the 343, with 12 channels, H, which is kind of a hand-done signal, and then P, which is used to program the other channels. It also has Ein, which is on, and Os, which is, well, off. There's also a volume knob over here, which works as you think it would. And then over here, if you unplug the headset, this will now work as a speaker. You plug it back in, this will only go directly to your headset. The final handheld radio we're going to talk about is the SEM70. This is actually a fairly complex radio. It has 2 transmitting powers, selectable over here. This is 4 watts, and this is 0.4 watts, and this is also the radio off. I don't think there's any detriment in ARMA to having it on the higher power setting, so you might as well just leave it on the higher power setting. This radio has 2 modes, selectable with this knob over here. The first is a manual mode. In this mode, you can change the raw frequency of the radio just like you can with the AN PRC77 with these 2 knobs here. This knob over here changes the size of the change in this knob. See, now it goes up by 50, whereas back over here, it goes up in increments of 25 kilohertz. If the display ever goes dark, you can use this button to light up the display again. And you actually have to hold it to see what you're doing. The other mode of this radio is an automatic frequency hopping mode, which is this setting. Remember I said where each radio can only use 1 frequency at one time? Well, I lied. This one can and does use multiple frequencies. But you, the user, wouldn't know that. What you need to know is that for your intents purposes, it uses 1 channel. And for multiple SEM70s to talk to each other, the 4 digits in this window have to be the same. And they're changed with these 4 dials down here. So again, all of these have to be the same in order for 2 separate SEM70s to talk to each other. Otherwise, they will not talk to each other. And that's the 7 handheld radios modeled by ACRE. Can these radios talk to each other? Well, yes and no. The 148, the 152, and the 117 can all talk to each other out of the box with no changes needed by you or the mission maker. Long range channel 1 on the 148 is the same as channel 1 on the 152 is the same as channel 1 on the 117. They all talk to each other, they all work with each other right out of the box. And that's it. None of the other radios talk to each other by default. However, they have the potential to. See, every radio except the 343 can have its channel frequencies programmed by either you, the user, or the mission maker. And if you program all these radios to use the same frequency, they will all talk to each other. But if you don't want to do any programming, just remember that the 148, the 152, and the 117 will all talk to each other out of the box. One thing I said I was going to talk about later was sharing radios. If you ACE interact with a radio and select share, what that does is if someone else were to ACE interact with you, they would have the option to pick up this radio and use it as if you're still holding the radio, but they would be using the radio. So that's a neat feature if you have perhaps your group uses a lot of RTOs and you want the squad lead or the CO to be able to pick up the RTO's radio. That's how you would do that. And then you, the user, can also unshare the radio. One feature I do want to talk about the handheld radios is ground masts. There are 2 placeable ground masts that will increase the transmission power of your radio up to 20 watts. It's compatible with every radio except the 343 and the SEM52, And to use it, you simply walk up to it, ACE interactive it, and connect, and then select which radio you want to connect. Right now, I only have the SIM52, the SIM70, and the 77 in my stack, so it'll connect to one of these two. You connect, it's connected to that, and now your transmission power is boosted. You can either disconnect interface, or if you walk far enough away, you can see that it will disconnect automatically. The only difference between these two is that this one is just mounted higher, which could be used to clear obstacles. And these can also be picked up. And so now if I look into my my inventory, I see it's here. This is GS for ground stand. If I picked up this one, it would say GSM. The smaller one is actually fairly small in your inventory, and one of these combined for 152 does weigh less than a 117, even though it provides the same power as a 117. This one's quite hefty and weighs more than any of the radios. But that's an option if you need to boost your radio range while not having to carry a backpack radio all the time. Next, let's talk about vehicle radios and vehicle intercoms. Vehicle radios in ACRE are actually normal handheld radios that are just mounted to a radio rack. This provides greater power and larger antennas, which greatly expands the range at which they can be used. I've included a chart to show which radios can be mounted and what their range bonuses is. Suffice to say, any vehicle-mounted radio should have enough range to cover the map in ideal conditions. Notice the vehicle racks get a slightly different designation, ANVRC, for vehicle radio communication. As for why do the numbers change, well, I don't know. Ask the U.S. Department of Defense. Vehicles can have radios already mounted, which you interact by going ACE interact with the vehicle racks. And for example, here's a 117F that's already been mounted. In this case, we cannot take it off, although in some cases you may be able to unmount the radio. In rare cases, there are also empty slots for radios for you to mount. In this case, there's an ANVRC 1110, which I can mount a 152 into here, and that is now a mounted radio. And you see I can also unmount it. The other thing with vehicle radios is in order to actually use them, you have to actually specifically use them. So either go to each individual radio and select Use, or go to Use All. Notice that if I right now in interactive radios, I only have one radio I can use, and I'm pushing my push-to-talk 2 and 3 keybinds, but I can't use them. But if I go to Racks, Use All, now if I self-interact, I can see I now have access to the two radios, and you see they have their vehicle designations up here, and I can interact with them just as I normally would. Since they're vehicle-mounted versions, the radios you already know how to use, they use the same interfaces, so there's no new interfaces to learn. One thing to note is that if you mount a radio, such as this 152, and I then get out of the vehicle, I no longer have that radio. That radio is now a part of that vehicle. The other thing I can see is when you use the radios, if you look up in the upper portion of my display there, you can see that I have D up and D low. That is for dash lower and dash upper. You could also see just dash if there's only one radio to be used. And you see there's R and T. R is receive, T is transmit. So in this case, I am receiving and transmitting on both of these radios. If you go to get into a vehicle, and you go to use the rack radio, and you don't get an option to use it, the only option you get is unmountable, then what you need to do is you actually need to go to the intercom setting. Let me look down so you can see it. Go to the intercom setting, go to crew, and then click open. This is the fully functional crew station as implemented by ACRE. The two top knobs control radios, the two bottom knobs control the intercom, which we'll get to in a second. If there's only one rack radio, then all you need to do is you need to flip this knob to A. This knob, labeled work, selects the transmitting radio. This knob selects a radio that which you only listen to. Notice that if I put this on work, both this dash radio will be both receive and transmit. However, if I flip this one, I can only receive on it. This may be useful to you if you want to just listen to a radio and you never need to transmit on it, but generally you're just going to put this on A. If you have multiple radios, you might put one on A and the other on B. Since we're talking about the intercom menu, let's go ahead and talk about intercoms. Intercoms are essentially just a hard-wired network for your vehicle crew and passengers. Any local speech done inside the vehicle will be transmitted over the intercom. Every member of the crew will hear it in their headset like a radio. This is great in loud vehicles, which is to say basically every military vehicle ever produced. A vehicle can have multiple intercom networks. We can see up here I've got Crew RT and Pax RT. If I go to the menu, I see Crew and Pax. This is a passenger intercom. This is an M2 A4 Slammer, and so it has 6 passenger seats in the back. And you can connect to multiple intercoms and talk on different intercom networks. You can also disconnect from multiple of them. In this menu, what this menu does is down here there's 2 knobs. Volume knob, which works as you think it does, and then the selector knob. The live and Vox settings are identical. This is basically anytime you speak in local speech, this will transmit over the intercom, whether you're using voice activation or your TeamSpeak push-to-talk. The push-to-talk setting down here uses that very specific intercom push-to-talk button that you may or may not have bound. I don't use that setting. I just leave it on live, and that way anytime I speak inside the vehicle, it just transmits over the intercom. The override setting, that's what OR means, basically shuts off every other intercom station, and they can only listen to you. They can't talk to you. This is perhaps useful if you're a commander of a vehicle and you want to override everything, tell everyone an important message. I generally don't need to use that, but it is an option available to you. One other thing to note is that if you're turned out from a vehicle, you cannot change radio settings. For example, you see here, it won't let me actually open up the radio to change it, but you can still use the radio, you just can't change any of the settings. You can change intercom settings while you're turned out. You can still use the intercom. You just can't change radio settings while you're turned out. The final vehicle implementation we're going to talk about is the Infantry Phone. This is literally a phone mounted on the outside of the vehicle that allows the infantry to talk to the crew members without the crew members needing to dismount. On some vehicles, it is located in a very specific point on the vehicle. You can see on this tank, it's mounted right here behind this cover. On most vehicles, though, it'll just be a normal interact option on the normal interact menu. From here, you can decide if you want to connect to the passenger intercom or the crew intercom, and when you do, this will connect you to that intercom and now talking on the intercom. And you can return the infantry phone if you want to. If you're a crew member and you want to get a hold of the infantry, you go to the infantry phone and you can ring it, which you can hear in the background is ringing it. If I turn out, it's actually quite loud. This will ring up until either you stop it or the infantry picks it up. Don't spam it, it's very loud, very annoying, but if you need to get a hold of infantry and you don't want to turn out, that could be a way you can do that. My final note is Spectator. While you're in Spectator, you basically share a lobby with everyone else that's dead and with you in Spectate, just like if you were just sharing a normal Discord or a TeamSpeak room. This means that you can talk with everyone that's dead and have a good time watching everyone that's still alive die.
I brought 2 dudes in.
Oh, there it is.
Rip.
As you move around the map in your camera, the local speech of the live players will still be played in 3D position. So if you move your camera close to somebody, you will hear them talking just like as if you were actually standing right next to them.
Yeah. It's just the fucking two bunker is just like constantly being enfilade fire.
Do they know there's a tank outside?
I love the tank just fucking...
By default, you won't be listening to any of the radios of the alive players. However, once you've selected a unit to spectate, you can select their radios to listen to.
Yeah, let's
The tank is literally aiming through the...
This is beautiful.
So, that's it. That's my ACRE tutorial as of January 2021. I'll include updates and corrections in the description as I find them. I'll also try to answer any of your questions in the comments. Thank you and have a good day.